Accelerating digitization in SMEs beyond coronavirus crisis, how to pivot and transform for immediate revenue. Coming up live shortly. Hi, welcome to Convex Hub channel. I'm Bonnie Ritzon, your host for Expert Insight at Live, a broadcast series featuring forums and interviews with industry thought leaders on market, policy, strategy, technology, and innovation that steer the industry growth. If you have any inquiries or questions, kindly post them through the Q&A message box right below the live broadcast window. As a result of COVID-19 pandemic, the customer behaviors and preferred interactions have changed significantly. The uptick in the use of digital services is here to stay. Many C-suite executives have led their companies to digitize at least some part of their business to serve customers facing mobility restriction. That's not all. Companies will also need to ensure that their digital channels are on par with or better than those of their competition to succeed in this new environment. Today, we have with us panelists from different backgrounds and expertise to share with the audiences, specifically the SMEs, on how to pivot and transform your current business model by embracing digital technologies for a successful recovery. Let me welcome our panelists. First and foremost, Yabruseha Chua Tian Cheng, better known as Tian Chua, Chairman of DAIA, and also he's the former Chairman of Malaysian Productivity Corporation. We have with us as well today, Mr. Shivaji Das, a partner and managing director, Frost & Sullivan, Asia Pacific. Shivaji has led several projects in corporate strategy, entry strategy, business planning and analysis, digital transformation, R&D planning, government and public policy, and also marketing strategy across USA, Middle East, and Asia for clients such as the World Bank, the Economic Planning Unit of Malaysia, Tourism Promotion Board, Philippines, and key conglomerates in the region. Also with us today is Madam Nur Aslina. She's the founder and group managing director and also CEO, Genexis Sendirian Berhad and IA Consulting Sendirian Berhad. Madam Nur Aslina has vast experiences in transforming and optimizing business process performances of major organizations and conglomerates. Last but not the very least, we have Mr. Ribo Alam, the Regional Director, Growth ADA. Ribo is an industry expert in outcome-based marketing strategies and is known for using real language and a common sense approach that deliver solid results. And as always, our discussion will be led by Mr. Michael Waits, the founder of Metallic Partners and Michael Waits Media. Without further ado, I will now hand over this segment to you, Michael.
Hi, Barney. Thank you very much. This is Michael Waits. And thank you to Barney for a super introduction, as always. Very much appreciated. And I would also like to thank our four guests today and our four panelists, Nur Aslina, Zainal Abidin, Shivaji Das, Ribo Alam, and Mr. Chua Tian Cheng. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Let's just jump right in and start with some definitions as we're going to talk about this acceleration of the digitization of SMEs. I guess the first thing I really want to understand is, what is everybody's definition of digital transformation? And maybe Nurul, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
You're
I
welcome.
think the digital transformation, whether it's for SMEs or not, or just for any business, the objective is to become competitive. And that means that in running any kind of business, to be successful, we need to be competitive. And the core piece of this is actually to make our process or business process, which is mainly logistical and administrative day-to-day operational processes, to be more efficient using digital technology. And that simply means that the output that we are looking for is actually constantly looking for new ways to save time, cost, and also to optimize our people. And the latest one we have in our business we're looking for right now is actually how do we harness the data that we obtain in our running of our business day to day for more customer insights, so that we can help to retain it can help us to retain businesses and grow our businesses with our clients. So that's to us, digital transformation at the end of the day translates into our business being competitive, more competitive in the market as compared to your competitors in the business.
Understood. Rebo, do you want to jump in and give your opinion on this? And then I'm going to move into what is an SME with a couple of the other guests.
Yeah, sure. Like I always think about the digital transformation has moved into an adaptation nowadays. It's a very frequently changing digital space we work on every day now. It's been there, like people are saying that it's people or the organizations that are more manual are moving to shift to a digital. It's not just sitting over there. Currently, everyone is digital at some point. They do have some process over there, but how frequently does it changing? How fast paced it is? And how do you adapt to those changes? And you bring in all those necessary changes to your business to bring in that life in your business outcome. That's where I think the digital technology is coming in as the transformation process as of today.
And I want to jump to the next topic here, really, which is what it really is an SME. And Shivaji, maybe you can start with this, and then we'll finish the definition part of this with Mr. Tian Chua.
Thanks, Michael. Different countries have different ways of categorizing SMEs, but essentially we are talking about companies which are below a certain threshold, whether it be in terms of turnover or whether it be in terms of number of employees they have. It could vary from sector to sector. In Malaysia, for instance, when it comes to the manufacturing sector, we are talking about companies maybe less than 50 million ringgit in revenues or between 75 to 200 employees. So different countries have different such benchmarks. Typical SME anywhere in the world would be a firm which has less than 100 employees and maybe about $10 million or less of revenues. But bear in mind, some countries like Korea or Germany, the definition of an SME could sound very much like a large company in some other markets.
Understood. Tian Chua, I want to leave this last part of the definition with you, and we can talk specifically about Malaysia, where a whole bunch of the economy is actually driven by SMEs. Is that incorrect?
Yeah, I think, SME is probably the latest term we use. And SME also gives certain legitimacy to some of the enterprises or entrepreneur, which previously, we will all lump them under what we used to call academically informal sector. Malaysia's been a bit unique because of the accessibilities to able to officiating and registering company. So we are actually seeing a large groups of what in other country might have been called informal sectors, but they are able to get a business license, they are able to get some sort of a company registered. So they are the main bulk of the economy. Just like many other developing countries, SME or the informal sectors actually play the biggest role in the daily life of the people. So I want to also touch on the issues of digitization. I think digitizations or accelerations of that definitely will increase efficiency, increase the ability for them to be more competitive. But the term itself could also be a barrier, especially when we talk about transformation. Is something quite scary for smaller enterprises to think that they need to go through a change. And, it's like this science fiction thing that you go inside a tube and then you come out with a brand new thing, which has always been the impressions of people talking about transformation. But I think what we have to be clear that any form of businesses to be successful, you require good planning. What it is from the day, that first day that human being or civilization engage in businesses, it's all about recording your entries, your bookkeepings, and all these things. Digitization is no different from that process, right? So I mean, you go to the Mohenjo-daro's, the Indus Valley thing, you have a lot of clay tablets. It's actually a business transaction that need to be recorded, who own who is the owner for these goods and things like that. So digitization is just to put this very primitive action, which any civilized people know how to do, into a digital platform where speed and transparencies are tremendously enhanced. And that, if we use this approach, then you wouldn't create a certain psychological or mental barriers to the SME who normally operated by people who do not have a university degree, or they do not have very high education, they don't know how a computer works and things like that. But basically what we need to let people know that digitization is allowing the society as well as the player themselves to have a much more transparent data accessible to all people that are concerned, and that give a better sense of how do we plan our business. So that's, to me, that is the key of the
for digital
digitization.
transformation. Look, and I think you make a really good point. You're transforming, you're not metamorphosizing, right? You're not changing it to something completely different. You're trying to just take some of the processes that you already have and digitize them. I'd like to go to Rebo maybe for a second and ask, you know, if you listen to what Tian Chua says, it sounds like it's necessary for every business to do. And again, whether it's an SME or not. And I have another question about the difference between an SME and a startup, and maybe Shivaji will go to you for that in a second. But Rebo, for you, it's really a two-sided question. Can SMEs even afford to go through this process of digital transformation? And can they afford not to?
I mean, it's you cannot afford at this time of not going digital. A lot of SMEs has been going through, especially during the pandemic, they have been looking out for the tools available, for the different pathways available, how to transform their business. It's actually been a question of their sustainability. So everyone is finding a way, everyone is trying to adopt something digital, and how to find a, like it's been mentioned, like you cannot change your business in a whole different way, but how do you bring in the changes? For example, like there will be a lot of people who has been just suppliers. Now the supply chain has been cut off. It's been very short. So the person who was sitting down, I'll take just a very normal example of a farmer who was doing who's producing a lot of his productions, let's say in the hills or somewhere far. But due to the huge supply chain interruption during the pandemic, he actually needs to find out how he's going to sell his products, right? So it's been a question of his sustainability of his own business, and he is looking for how can I sell this product not to a supplier now, because there's not too much of suppliers out there. How do I bring it out to the people? So it's been a necessity, and it's been a question of survival actually for them.
Right, so you actually bring up another really good point. In this region, right, whether you're in Vietnam or you're in Indonesia or you're in Malaysia or in Thailand, agriculture is also a big part of these businesses, right? And whether you consider them SMEs or not, agriculture is really important, and agri-tech is actually starting to play a big role. Shivaji, I want to ask you this though. How do you ensure, because part of digital transformation has to include some kind of training. If you go to a typical smallholder farmer, they may or may not understand how to use technology to improve the efficiencies that everybody on this call has already mentioned. So what role does that play in it? And what type of support can you give those types of people, even if they don't fall into this sort of traditional category of an SME, to ensure that they're trained as well, because there is fear, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's the big part of getting the whole digital transformation part right, because you may have all the fancy technologies, you may have all the funding available to adopt these things, but unless culturally or skill wise you are ready to pick these up and take these into the market, it's going to be a major challenge. We have seen some interesting examples for the
Tell me.
sectors that you mentioned, some pilot studies which have been done even in less developed economies such as Pakistan. We have seen some trials of that happen in Malaysia as well, where, for instance, farmers have been given customized smartphones. Yeah, so they have these customized smartphone which has only maybe 5 or 6 items in the menu, and you are not allowed to do anything else with that phone. You can't make a WhatsApp call, you can't watch TikTok with that phone. But these smartphones have special buttons which allow you to access the market, access government schemes, access technical help about how to deal with a crop disease or certain soil conditions. And in order to ensure adoption, these phones have been given out for free. So when I'm talking about Pakistan, when I'm talking about Malaysia, in these pilot cases, these phones have been given out free. And then bunch of students from the universities have been sent to these villages to train these farmers day in, day out on how to use and how to adopt, and even create some kind of a reward system so that if they use this more, they get certain credits which they can use to get discounts on fertilizers and other stuff. So this is an example of how you need to attack multiple aspects. You need to address the technological familiarity, you need to address the price of these technology devices, and then you need to, as we say, train the hell out of the people involved so that they are more willing and as well as familiar in using some of these systems.
So again, you make a really good point. And I was on the phone with somebody from Indonesia yesterday or the day before, I can't remember, a woman who runs a company called Duanyam. And they literally go out to the countryside and train local communities and local villages on how to use the smartphone to improve their efficiencies for both supply chain and delivery, and also financials. And I think this is something that Tian Chua mentioned as well. If you become more efficient in your ability to manage your finances, then you can obviously become more efficient in the way you grow your business. I wanted to ask you, Nurul, if you see a relationship between what maybe some startup companies are doing in the context of SMEs and how they can help them. And do you make a distinction when you're thinking about it? I mean, is there a real difference between an SME and a startup company? Small, lower revenue, that kind of thing.
You see, I'm going to looking at the distribution of our SMEs right now, right? We have about 98.5% of the registered business in Malaysia are actually
SMEs.
Considered as SMEs, and that's about 900 over 1,000 of those people. But if you look at the breakdown, 78% of those population are actually micro enterprises. And this raised some questions, 20% are small, 2.3% are medium. So when we want to differentiate between startup and SMEs, then there's a question of how do you classify the startup? And then when you have 78% of your population are actually micro enterprises. So we define SMEs, all over the world, as how Shivaji has mentioned just now. We define it based on a certain threshold of revenue or assets that they have, or a number of employees that they have. But if you look at Malaysia, our definition of SME for manufacturing, we say between 300,000 ringgit to 15 million ringgit, 5 to 75 employees. That's considered as small. But for services, it's below 3 million ringgit and 5 to 30 employees. And then medium goes higher, up to 50 million revenue, up to 75 people. But then again, we look at contribution of all these SMEs, again, back to our GDP, right? So they contribute about 38%. I think in our last Department of Statistics said that they contribute 38% of our GDP. And the industry that makes out of this is actually agriculture, construction, services, and manufacturing. And if you look at the breakdown again for export, services come out as number one. They are number one in terms of revenue contributor for export for SMEs. So now your question is, can we differentiate between startup and SME? At this juncture, I think especially when we are being hit by this pandemic, I really don't think we should be differentiating whether they are a startup or they are a micro company. What if a company has been set up and they remain micro for 15 years?
Right.
So do we still continue to help them and assist them because they fall under micro? And what is a startup if they set up during the pandemic? I met a company recently who actually went into marketing of vegetables for farmers because of the pandemic. They couldn't, logistical issues, so they couldn't bring those items to the market, and so they went into providing a platform. They're a startup. They're just barely 3 months old now, but their revenue has outgrown some of those micro enterprises. If we check the data of these micro enterprises that has been in existence for 15 years, and their revenue for the past 3 months has outgrown these companies. So startup versus micro, how do we differentiate them? Then again, these businesses are actually, what is your view as the business owner to want to take this forward, right? So like your question earlier, can we afford not to digitally transform? It's a choice. So
right, and I think you're referencing the HRTF report that gives all the data, at least the most recent one in September 2019, that gives all the data on the structure of the SME businesses in Malaysia. I also want to point out that at 38% of the GDP production, it's relatively close to what is in Thailand. Thailand has about 3 million businesses that are considered SMEs, although the registration process is different here. That's about 43% of the economy. And Vietnam is very similar. About 98% of registered businesses are also considered SMEs, and they're about 40% of GDP. I want to go back to Tian Chua for a second and just talk about some advice or some examples you can give to some of these SME companies about how they should go through the process of digital transformation, but also more specifically, how did COVID change this? And maybe you can talk specifically about Malaysia, and then we can ask other people what they've seen in their regions as well. Has it accelerated it? Has something really changed?
Yeah, I think for SMEs, by definition, we know that they have limited capital and limited capacities. I want to agree with earlier speakers who say that it is an imperative for everyone. They cannot afford not to be, right? So this imperative should not be put towards that if you are a startup or you are SME, if you don't evolve or transform or perish. It is not about that. Digitizations give us a different meanings of things, which I means that we must transform in a macro economic level. Means that the government, the states, the big enterprise and the small enterprise, as well as the SME, cannot afford to see the macro environment to go digitized together. In that sense, to me, digitization is also a form of democratization of the market. Because when everyone is in the market that has been digitized, first you have a more accurate registrations of your GDP and your market share. Today, a lot of situations that the states and the government are unable to capture these people who are not, do not even have a basic account, they do not write their things in the proper taxation form. So digitization allow us to be able to have a more accurate data. It also gives big firm a much more accurate information about consumer patterns, the availability of supply, the availability of markets and things like that. But for SME, the important part is that you are given things on a platform where you can choose and you can see things clearly. You're not restricted to a supplier who has been maybe traditionally you've been doing business with that since your parents have been doing business. So you only know that it's the price and this is the way that you're. But when you go up to Lazada, you found that actually the supplier is selling you 10 times more expensive than what you can get from a much more situation. So I think these are the situation that you also means that when prices are no longer issues, then services and also qualities matter. So that's why I would say that it is a societal change. The transformation is not on the burden of SME itself. It is important for the government to prepare sufficient, easy to use, and accessible platform so that they can enter easier. I want to talk a little bit on the startup. Startup has been always a very difficult thing for small companies, small firms. That's because of the bureaucratic procedures and the problem. If you go digitize, which is not just the merchant themselves or the vendor themselves go online to sell their product, it is also means business licensing, the approval, the inspections go digital, where government will cut down red tape, cut down corruptions, will allow people to be much easier to operate business, and that will definitely cut down costs, which is a burden for SME.
Sure.
So I
So
think
this is
digitization is everybody, and
This is-
then you can be a successful one.
Yeah, so you actually make a really good point, and that was going to be my follow-on question, and maybe I'll start with you, Shivaji. In Singapore, where you live, and even in Malaysia, where the other two participants live, and and also for Rebo, who is domiciled in Malaysia, you have things like Magic that help teach startups how to build their businesses and scale. You have NRF, you have the IDMA, you have all these infrastructures around how to help startups. But one of the things that they do as well is they let them write off equipment. They teach them how to use software. They provide free services through Google. And I'm wondering, and again, Shivaji, I want to start with you, but I want to go around and end with Tian Chua. What should the governments be doing, you think, or what kind of advice would you give them to be able to help SMEs that have already been existing but need to go through this digitization process to democratize that as well, so that it's not just focused on startups that can go out and raise funding at ridiculous valuations, whereas an SME that's running an existing business but just wants to grow, it's much harder for them to get funded. So where would you start with your recommendation on the SME side, based on what you know about what's happening in the startup world?
So I would say that it requires holistic intervention. You cannot just address one aspect of the whole equation.
Absolutely.
In Singapore, for instance, we had cases where, because of the pandemic, our retail organizations, which are mostly SMEs, they were struggling to deliver, they were struggling to reach out to their customers. So within a week or so, there were these online platforms built up, which were supposed to help SME grocers both reach out to customers as well as ensure the delivery. But the pickup rate has been rather low, and some of the issues that we have seen is that in some cases, for instance, if it's the arts and creative industry, the commissions charged by ticketing organization, for instance, are too high for an SME. If they are already being squeezed for cash and they are struggling with revenues, when you have to give away 10%, 20% to just a ticketing company or to a delivery company, that becomes too much of a burden. So here again comes the question of whether we have enough competition in some of these last mile delivery organizations that we have in Singapore. So again, to come back to your question, it requires holistic intervention. There's the skills part, there's the funding part, there's the infrastructure part of it, and then there's also the market structure part of the thing, so that you don't have too many monopolies, too many oligopolies in the system, which can extract a lot of rent out of these SMEs, which really kills the business model and the whole logic for transforming themselves digitally. Yeah? So these are some of the things I believe governments can intervene and create a fairer marketplace going forward.
Understood. Reba, do you want to give your opinion on this?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's the right way has been put, that they are struggling to fulfill the last mile. Whenever they, I mean, even in Malaysia, like the whole SMEs are getting trained, they're getting equipped with a lot of technological partners and stuff. Two part they do feel are struggling actually. One is the rightfully brought in about the fulfillment, because at the end of the day, when they're trying to go and reach out to the consumer, there's only few partners who are fulfilling a lot of things. It could be also the payment methods. There might be only few e-wallets, and then it's getting regulated by the government, and the SMEs has to pay a lot to put those systems in their own process, right? So they're struggling over there. It's a huge cut going from there. Another part where SMEs are struggling a lot that I feel is to refine and define the audience where they can find those. So they are struggling to use the audience data. That's something also I think could be very helpful to find out the right consumers in the right time. A lot of help is coming from different aspects, but then yet those tools doesn't have the right full audience definition, all the information that SMEs can use. So I think that's something also government can help to regulate and give a much better view to these SMEs, who are those target audience and audience that they need to go after.
Are you suggesting that the data itself is actually should get democratized? In other words, Lazada can definitely acquire much more data much more cheaply than a typical SME. And this gets back to something you were talking about as well, this accrual of power and the concentration of power for these larger and larger and faster growing enterprises. And one of the things that makes that wheel spin even faster is their ability to accumulate data and then to use that data as power to eliminate some of the smaller SMEs. Are you suggesting as well that that data should be democratized and shared, even if it's anonymous?
Yes, of course. That's what I feel like. Because if I'm an SME, then I know in my marketplace, I have only 2 biggest players. So I don't know much about my audiences when I'm a startup even. Then right away, we know that I have 2 platforms that I can go to and where my share has to be shared among them. So your revenue pipeline will already be taking a hit.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I mean, data obviously is really important.
That's already a right away struggle right over there for them.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about, first I want to get to Neural as well and understand your view on this, and maybe you can give government some advice on how they should handle this digitization for SMEs. I want to end with Tianqiu on this topic for sure.
Okay, so Michael, I think the government of Malaysia has initiated digitalization for SME long before the pandemic issue hit us, right? So we've got, for many years, the government under our SME Corp had initiated a lot of initiatives for SMEs to adopt digitalization. But somehow the take-up rate has been poor. We simply are of an opinion that the awareness or the education in terms of what is digitalization and how it should actually impact their businesses is low among this population of people. So coming back to startup and how they could jump on board straight away to digitalization, it's because of, at the very start, the mindset is actually on adopting technology to push your business forward.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so when you talk about now, post-pandemic, our Prime Minister announced, a fund for digital transformation, which will be under MDAC, which will be under Magic, and some SME Corp. So these are initiatives or incentives that the government are actually giving, but it is still very broad and wide in terms of how and what these people are going to adopt. So I think it's making digital transformation into small chunks applicable to the sizes of the organization and the type of services that they're in or businesses that they're in, customizing that into subscribable cloud-based solution, that people could onboarding could be done as fast as possible. So the fear of most SMEs that we speak to as well is that they are afraid to get on board, they need some kind of consulting or some kind of expert's advice that will cost them money, which is not part of the incentive that's being given to them, or in general, they would say it's expensive, and what if the incentives run out and we will have to end up maintaining this. So the mindset is still that digital transformation is something we need to do for our business, when it should be digital is business. In the era today, business is digital. You can't run away from that. So that mindset first have to be corrected, and the adoption of technology at the typical traditional organization is low, simply because the education and awareness, and they have been in existence for a long time without having to go on board. And it's just that this pandemic, they see a difficulty in going to market, but how to adopt the technology and transform the business to a different level is something that they are still struggling, and that needs help, that needs hand holding to a certain aspect for those companies or organization that has been in existence based on traditional setup.
Got it. And as a follow-on to that, and this one is for you, Mr. Tianchua,
Yeah.
if SMEs do digitize to the extent that we all think is going to happen, and if COVID itself is changing this and even accelerating it, right, particularly with people working from home and companies understanding how they can become more efficient using technology, what happens to economies? We can start with this question first, right? But what happens to economies when people sort of get digitized out of a job, right? So how do you balance this idea that companies should become more digital because it makes them more efficient? And you even mentioned it. Let me just finish. You even mentioned this, that even the setup of a company should be 3 clicks away. I want to set up a company. I can verify all my documents. I can insert my bank account. I can insert my country ID or my passport, depending on what it is. But if I do that, and let's say I automate my accounting or my supply chain, some people are going to lose their jobs, and it's accelerating, right, in COVID. How do we address that as well?
Yeah, I believe that that's a challenge for any form of transformation. We used to think about machine will replace people. We used to be afraid of electricities because electrifications might replace people.
Yeah, I'm not afraid. I'm just saying, but yeah.
I mean, that's the discourse has been like that. You know, when computer come, people talk about computer replacing people. But I think at the end of the day, we realize that it is an imaginative fallacy. I want to again to put this digitization in not a myth. We have to demystify it. And the issues that a lot of SME, a lot of companies are quite willing to digitize. And Malaysian government has always been, at least on the language and the policies, been very advanced. We were among the first Asian country talk about paperless, talk about multimedia, super corridor, talk about digitization, Silicon Valley of Asia, and things like that.
Yep.
However, I think the key is that government itself must treat this digitization as a form of democratic access so that big players, small players have opportunity to come in. But what we find is that the bureaucracy itself very hard for them to change because despite all the talk about digitization and the know who is still more important than know how. Actually, for me, it is also a form of cultural change in the bureaucracy where everyone is subject to the same rules. And then they access to that, they go online, they register a company, they get a loan, they know the condition, they get it. And then it will help not only the big company, but it's also help SME to get that sort of access. For the issues, I want to use an example to answer your question.
Please.
For me, some of the things that human is irreplaceable, and but it also requires some value change. And people will ask, if I'm a bank or I'm in a government service, if everything can be done by AI and everything, your transactions, your banking account can be all handled by computers and AI, what do bank need stuff for? I say it's still easy. I mean, people don't always want to put on the phones or go on internet to get everything information. They still need some human interaction. For me, you cannot replace something like if the staff and are not required to do the calculations of interest rate, the human beings are not required to what's it called, registered transactions or clearing your checks. They have to sit down and give teas to the customers. And that is a competitive enhancement because no companies can use a robot to serve you tea and
Nobody
you can
wants to be
have
served tea by a
very
robot, though.
interesting that you serve teas and And in fact, we are going to look as if we are going to create a much more human society where this complicated manual works that's very meticulous can be left with the computer, but entertaining customers, talking about their children, talking about that, it is a very important part of the firm. So, and I think that there will be certain value change where companies that value those sort of interhuman relations might even do well in the. Similarly, if AI is handling all your business license applications and your payments of tax and other things, and civil servant who serve you tea, talk to you, will give government a better image, and it will help government to be re-elected. It will help people to feel that you know, government departments or bureaucracy actually care about our life. So I think it's the same. I mean, if jobs can be matched through computer matching, but the labor department sitting down to talk about the hardships of workers they've been going through, it is certainly a value set enhanced to productivities, and that cannot be replaced with robots or cybots or something that computer screens can do. So I would say that digitization will free us out from many of the chores, but it will allow human to interact in a more valuable way.
Right.
So I would say that will enhance. There will be more of that created, and that give us added value.
Right. So as we moved from an agrarian economy, this is true globally and in any country, there was a lot of dislocation, a lot of employment dislocation. What is a farm worker going to do in a factory? No idea how to do that. And when we moved from the Industrial Revolution sort of into the information revolution, we saw the same fears and the same dislocations. What am I going to do? All I know how to do is screw something into the side of a car. I don't understand how to extract data from a computer. And as we move into this sort of what I'll call the information economy, or the AI and ML economy, which is just information on steroids, there's going to be dislocation. But I tend to agree with you, actually. And I'll tell you why. And maybe, Shivaj, you can comment on this as well, particularly in the context of this digitalization of SMEs. I think humans want to deal with other humans. I interrupted Tianchu earlier and I said, I don't think anybody wants to get served tea by a robot, because they want to look into somebody's eyes and smile and say, thank you. That's the outlier for service. And no matter how amazing or polite a robot is, there's no visceral connection. But I do think that during the transformation period and that dislocation period, it's going to be hard, right? And I'm curious about how, and I'm curious, Shivaji, how you think this dovetails with this whole idea of digitalization. And then I want to move on to another topic about how COVID and digitalization is affecting central business districts and SMEs that are acting there. But Shivaji, I'm just curious about your opinion on that.
So it's interesting, and definitely the transition is not going to be easy. Right. Case in point, what you all mentioned before COVID, most of the countries, except for a few large economies like India, were actually witnessing some of the lowest unemployment levels. Yeah, despite all this news about AI and despite all this news about jobs being taken away by technology, we had the period of least unemployment in the last few decades, when this AI was really catching up in the last year or so. Of course, everything changed after COVID, but even with digital transformation, you can use the same technologies we are talking about to actually skill and empower people to take on new jobs which will be coming up. For instance, just 10 years back, you wouldn't have jobs which would involve looking through YouTube videos and scanning for harmful content. And today in Kenya or places like Philippines, you have tens of thousands of people working just watching these YouTube videos. And similarly, you have these possibilities of new jobs being created over time, which involve digital technologies. And you can use digital technologies to train the same group of people as well. Especially during this pandemic period, courses on digital platforms such as Udemy and all have really become a lot popular than it used to be. So people have been learning not just how to make cakes, but they have also been learning how to edit videos. They've been learning how to pick up PowerPoint skills, how to pick up analytics skills by just spending like $20 on a course, which was earlier so much more expensive and so much more intense in terms of the commitment that it involved from people to get themselves upskilled. So there are both sides of the coin. There will be new jobs which will be created, and you can use the same digital technologies to equip yourself at a much cheaper and at a convenient pace, which could probably help you to cope with this future. Now, will there be certain losers from this whole transformation? Definitely there will be, and that's where society needs to step in with safety nets and other mechanisms to help this group of people who are vulnerable and will perhaps not benefit the same way as others will.
Right. I want to change the topic, as I mentioned before I asked you that question. I'm looking at the screen, and I'm in an office, but it's not really my office. And I think that Rebo says you go to work every 4 days a week, but 1 day a week you work from home. And Shivaji, it looks like you're at home. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So I think whether it's a big business or a small business or an SME, I think a lot of companies have figured out that working from home is actually okay, right? So this digitalization is actually having an impact, I think, on the necessity to, and I'll put it in quotes, to go to work today or to go to an office today, forgetting about the unemployment, which we've already addressed. It's not that it's not important, but we've already kind of talked about it. Reba, I want to start with you, but I want you to think a little bit about if everything is changing after COVID, and I don't think things go back to normal, whatever normal is. What happens to places like Singapore, KL, Jakarta, Bangkok, Boston, New York, where the central business districts are where most business takes place, and even in San Francisco, where rents for offices have just skyrocketed over the past 10 or so years? What happens to rents? Do people move out to the suburbs? And what does that mean for the impact on real estate and office space, particularly in the context of SMEs that may or may not maintain a full office going forward?
I think it's a very good situation that has brought up already due to pandemic, unfortunately, but it's the major truth over there, especially for SMEs and startups, mostly in SMEs, who has like already have some structures inside with a lot of team. Now with this practice that working from home, they have seen how you can actually collaborate. A lot of them had a thought like, yes, we all need to come to office, need to go to a meeting room, find out things. But due to the pandemic, they have been pushed to the home and work from there. So what I believe that within the teams, there certainly will be a lot of the teams that can take work from home. They really don't need to be present in office. At least not every day. They don't need. Even I also felt and has seen that teams has moved totally into home for past 4 months. Haven't come to office at all. Efficiency wise, they're doing just perfect. Maybe at first there was a little hiccups when they're not used to it, but like past couple of months, they are actually more than perfect. They are even finishing things on time.
Faster.
Because there's no time. Yeah, because there's no time lagging. It's not going out to find a lunch. It's not taking time to travel, getting up a little bit early to get ready. He's actually appreciating I'm getting at least an hour extra sleep. So I think this practice will come back, and it'll be very positive, and it'll help them to the future to move different teams to home or work from distance, and it'll just bring in more values for the team.
Yeah, so Nurselina, we talk about digitalization, particularly for SMEs, as a little bit, not completely, but a little bit of a cost-cutting exercise. But if you're sending people home to work, maybe before they were working from home, they didn't have high-speed internet. Maybe they didn't have enough bandwidth to do conference calling to replace a meeting. And maybe they weren't running in this region, right? So in Bangkok, in Vietnam, in Malaysia, and Indonesia, it's warm. But maybe they weren't running their air conditioning all day. So who pays for that? In other words, how do you advise SMEs to think about those types of costs as opposed to the types of costs that they're using to run an office, which they may or may not do going forward?
Yeah, I think we also, as an organization, we discussed that. Yeah. We have also a policy that half of our workforce will work on alternate days. Some will come to office on different days,
Right.
and some stays at home. Um, at the crux of it is that there will be savings in terms of now organization do not need as much space as you thought you would before the pandemic. So we as an organization as well, we were in the process of buying a property for our office, and we decided not do that.
Not to, right?
Not to. In fact, we are now moving to a smaller outfit, which can take 50% of our workforce because we are implementing the 50% work from home. But the savings that we concluded from this initiative, we have decided that it will have to be translated back to the benefits for the employees because now they're working from home. So they need to be equipped with internet access because during the whole lockdown, we just simply expect people to have access to internet. But now it's a job requirement, so it's a necessity. So it's like an infrastructure that we have to provide to them to have access to internet 24/7. So like it or not, we are exploring the option of providing this accessibility to our people because we expect them to be available to have meetings, to have discussion, and to be doing presentation to clients even through online. Yeah, so that's considered as a job benefit that we will have to give out to our people. And so when we talk about cost savings on the infrastructure bit in the physical office location, and yes, rental has gone down significantly.
It would, right?
In KL as well, which is a good thing for us. I mean, we could see at least 25-30% reduction in rental in location where businesses are prime. So now, when those savings that are incurring, SMEs need to look at how you can then reward or give certain kind of benefits that are going to encourage adoption of digital by the employees. So we also have to consider that with the virtual working from home, we now are no longer limited to the 8 hours of working because we expect to have meetings and deliverables at any time we expect to. And meetings are happening at 10 o'clock at night, or whatever the deadline will be, we are having all these meetings. So well-being of the employees need to also be addressed, because some of our staff, where we interviewed them, and they said that some are stressed out because when we're working from home, there's also that home environment. Not everybody has the luxury of having caretakers for their kids, when they're at home.
Even a separate room where they have an office, right?
Yeah, so that's something that we have to consider to make sure that there is a certain kind of benefits being allocated to your staff to allow them to have a comfortable place at home to work. Because that will be the new working way that we have to adopt, because there's no necessity for you to spend on office lots anymore nowadays.
Right, and so I want to move to Tianqiu on this, but I like to think of second and third order impacts of digitalization, particularly when it comes to SMEs. If, as Nurul suggests, that only 50% of her workforce is going to be in the office, means instead of buying a building, you now move to a smaller office. What are some of the other second or third order impacts? In other words, in a central business district, there were a bunch of restaurants or street food or stalls that sold food. Those people are also impacted by those SMEs that have 100 employees going down to get lunch every day. But on the flip side, like you said, if people move out of the city or don't work in the city as much anymore, then we have the potential for people to build houses that look differently or retrofit those houses, add more network connectivity. So this gets back to the thing we talked about earlier, where humans will adapt, but the impact of that digitalization is not all, it's not all negative for sure. What are some of the other second or third order impacts that you're seeing, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's digitization's, well, not digitization. Actually, COVID actually triggers something which is already something that's already coming, which is a working behavioral change.
Yep.
And that has nothing to do with COVID directly, but COVID accelerated that because
Definitely.
as we have seen, workspace rental or rentals, with no offense to the real estate sectors, has been one of the segment that rip off the highest portions of the produce.
I'm glad you said it.
And then it has the least added value needed, right? I mean, how much you're going to renovate your office and all these things. There's a limit to do, but the what's it called? The profit from it is purely by the needs to concentrate people in certain
In one
area.
place.
Therefore, it's escalated the price. Today, with the new behavioral change, people are no longer confining to workspace and living space, and people realize that behaviorally, workspace and living space is a question of time. How much we dedicate our time for the company, for the firm, and how much we dedicate for the families or recreation, and that require also regulatory process, whether by the government or by the firm negotiation themselves, so that you don't be 24 hours on call whenever is needed. If this is 24 hours, there should be only a certain staff and a rotation basis. So these are the things that need to be changed. But immediately, those sectors that depends on concentrations of people, for
Right.
example, office workers and also hawkers that sell things, lunch at the office space, they will be affected. That definitely.
Absolutely.
That
Right.
also required for most businesses, SME, no longer depends on volume. Because previously, if we look at local council, there's also much hawker stores is allowed by the councils, the local council, and that's the source of power by the local council to say you are allowed to do business here because this is an office block. Then you know there is a captive consumer. So then you also drive up the price, drive up corruptions, and cause all other problems. Today, there's no longer the automatic benefit for you. So SME has to change itself. They had to be more creative. They had to do something more attractive so that they can keep their profit level. So at the same time, I would like to go back to Nurul, say that when you save from the office rental, you save from other things, you have to go together with sharing economy. Means that they will be returned back to better incentive for the staff, better welfare for the in terms of the staff performance and things like that. So this has to come together. I agree with you. In the immediate sense, there will be a lot of discomfort. There will be a lot of setback, and that's where I think government must come in. This is the best time and most appropriate time to start thinking about social safety nets and talk about protecting those vulnerable groups, protecting those people who lost income not because they are not hardworking enough, just because
Right.
they are unlucky. And I still think that the society can afford it because with digitization, when I say digitization, not in terms of firm, but entire societies or entire nation, you will increase and enhance productivities, and you will also increase revenues that can be collected. And those revenues must be put into good use and not to be monopolized by certain segment of the society, but to be shared to those people who are less fortunate or those people who have been left out in the process of this transformation. So I think this is an entire challenge that we have to make. And again, I would say that the issues is not at the macro level, but it's not at the micro level, but
Micro
it's
level, yeah.
at
At the
the
macro
macro
level.
level.
Absolutely. Look, one of the questions that I did want to ask everybody, and maybe we can sort of crest this into the end, is, and Neural commented on this and kind of brought it up, but if your margins are higher because your physical fixed costs are lower, one, you do, I will say, have to offer benefits to your employees to be able to be just as productive, if not more productive at home. But for those employees, like you said, that lose their employment, not because they're not hardworking, not because they're not diligent, not because they're not smart, and actually not because they're not skilled, but because it's just become possible through digitization to make them redundant. And maybe, Shivaji, I'll just start with you. Are we kind of dancing around this idea of UBI, and that's going to be a result of this digitalization of not just SMEs, but all companies, the entire economy, from a macro level, yeah?
Mhm. Yeah, there are so many initiatives now aligned with UBI, which are happening in many parts of the world. The famous study in Finland, of course, the Universal Basic Income Study, which was done in Finland and showed some positive results. But even in places like Singapore, which has always been very reluctant to adopt such measures, now certain pilot schemes are being tried out, even in Singapore as well. So yeah, from a policy perspective, I mean, we cannot deny that there will be some people who will not be as fortunate and winners in this whole transition process, and they need to be supported. And that's where schemes like UBI will be very useful. Conditional cash transfers, certain variations of that will be very useful. And I mean, some sectors, you just can't avoid the impact of COVID, no matter how much you digitize. Tourism sector, for instance, which thrives on physical experience, no matter how much you create a virtual experience out of visit, you can never replicate a ride in the theme park just by watching a 3D animation on your virtual reality headset. So there will be sectors which will see effect, and there will be people who will be affected. And that's why we need to try out all these schemes such as UBI, conditional cash transfers, as well as maybe mandatory employment. Some countries are also trying with mandatory employment for certain affected people with certain specific minimum wages. So all these schemes will need to be tried out, and then based on the local circumstances, adapted accordingly.
Got it. Rebo, do you want to pipe in? You're muted.
Yeah, I think it's so like Shivaji rightfully said, like you cannot really put every industry in to do like digitalization. It's end to end because it's also part of the experience that's been needed. But like we said, like so digitalization it will go through different patterns. It'll be the adaptation. So based on each business needs and nature of business, how they are operating, it will come in over there, and the government's regulations will definitely be coming in, because right now different type of industries are getting some type of SOPs given to them, right? So of course there will be a lot of involvement and improvement and improvisation coming to this practice, and hopefully will change with the SMEs as well.
Got it. Neural?
I think in Malaysia, we are already implementing something like UBI, where we are focusing on the B40 groups below a certain income level will get some sustenance from the government on a quarterly basis, I believe. But what is most important is actually for us to look at the affected group and see what are the interim support that the government is required to give, like a basic monthly income for those affected group. But what is the ecosystem that we are putting in place to ensure that these people are being retrained, reskilled, or be prepared for a more relevant job function or scope within the new normal, for example. So I think we discussed about automation, digitalization, and the impact of all this, and then how it affected jobs. But there will be 3 competencies that I believe, even with digitalization, the human brain is something that is able to solve problems, do critical thinking, and are creative. So these 3 main competencies of being a human will never be something that would be taken over by digitalization. The machines analyze, churns data, collects data, but you solve the problems. You think you are being creative. So making sure that our workforce or the affected groups are actually prepared with all these necessary skills to solve problems, to do critical thinking, and have extensive creativity, crucial in us to go ahead in the stage that we are now in, the rebuilding stage of the economy. From now until December, I think all of us are actually in the rebuilding stage. We are reimagining, we are reshaping, we are redesigning our business processes, our business model. So at this stage, it's very important that those workforce that are affected be supported by a certain ecosystem that would be able to train, groom them, because once the economy is ready, these people will then again, if they are equipped with the necessary skill sets, they will then again be relevant for the economy. So that's having UBI forever is not the solution, but as an interim solution, it's a necessity right now.
I understand. And why don't I give the last word to you, Mr. Tianjia?
I want to slightly disagree with Nuru on that, because to me, we cannot treat this COVID as a one-off thing, and therefore safety nets or provide some sort of social support as just to overcome the crisis. But it has to be built into the structure. That require policymakers to understand that to protect the vulnerable communities, the B40 or whatever we call them, is that it is not just a humanitarian value, but it is good for the economy. If we do not trying to close the gap, then we will have social problem. Then we will have unstable markets. And the whole purpose of having digitization, not only for SMB, but it also for government to be able to provide better tools to develop more precise assistance need to every different vulnerable groups. And we can do it in a very precise and based on needs that of all different groups. So, and because of digitization, because everyone is in the data, then we can be able to do it much better. So I would say this is I want to give a very simple example.
Please.
The government giving 200 ringgits to all these people. They will call the assistance of the local MPs or whatever to call each of them and give them a check or put them into an account. And why can't we go through the statistic and we pump in 200 ringgits per month to every single individuals based on the e-wallet, and then you can design the aids that you need. Someone's need rice more than others, and you can give the basic necessity. Some others needs business support, and there are different ways of doing it. So I think this is what we need to do, to be able to understand that this sharing economy is to create a stable markets so that everyone can grow, and digitization will help us to plan better at both micro and macro level. And for that, I think we need to have compassion, and we need to be able to protect so that everyone has the rights to survive. Thank you.
Right. I mean, I can architect a system over the next 3 minutes that would actually go through, do exactly what you just said. If you use the right type of technology and collect the right type of data, instead of creating programs that are wasteful, in other words, giving the resources, and I said resources, yeah, not money, to people that don't need them, but also targeting based on data, based on your knowledge, using the digitalization that we're seeing in the SME space across the board in the macroeconomy. We should be able to create government policies, whether it's UBI or mandatory work, which are kind of the flip sides of the same coin. We should be able to create them in a way that's super efficient so that there's no waste, and actually, like you said, benefits society as a whole and removes the necessity for this social dislocation that has resulted at every other transitional and transformational point as economies change, as we said, from agrarian to industrial, from industrial to information, because now the governments have the abilities, if they use it in a way that, like you said, is empathetic and caring, to be able to create the right policies to help the right people. Anyway, this discussion today has been amazing, and I have learned a ton. I want to thank everybody for coming in and doing this today. Nurslina Zainal Abidin, we've been calling you Nurul the whole time, but thank you very much for doing this. Shivaji Das, really great insights. Riba, you as well. And Mr. Tian Cheng, thank you very much for coming and doing this. I really appreciate it. And Barney, thanks for setting it all up. It's really great to Confex for giving us this platform to have this incredible conversation.
Thank you, everybody.
Awesome and splendid indeed. A very insightful and exciting discourse. Thank you very much once again to Yang Brusa, Tenchua, Mr. Sivaji Das, Madam Nuraslina, and also Mr. Ribu Alam for joining us today. And as always, thank you very much as well to you, Michael. It's always been a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for moderating this discussion. And to all our viewers out there, thank you for watching Expert Insight at Live. If you missed some parts of this live broadcast, you can, of course, log in again and watch it on demand. To support our initiative in providing more industry and market insights, please subscribe to Confex Up channel, switch on the notification, and get notified on our Expert Insight at Live on-demand videos. Do follow us on our LinkedIn page, FB page, and Twitter for more interesting episodes and topics on market, policy, strategy, technology, and innovation in your economic sector that have steered the industry growth. Coming up next, crypto assets, cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin from Sharia perspective, October 6, 2020, 2 p.m.